So today, meet Mike Maynard. He is a tech enthusiast and the owner of Napier, who loves to engage conversations and latest advancements in his industry. He has over 20 years of experience in directing PR and marketing programs for various tech clients. Mike offers a rare combination of technical and marketing expertise. And hello and welcome, Mike, to the Coffee and Hustle podcast. I do want to mention before you start, this is our first real international podcast. And what I mean by that is that we're in definitely different time zones in different countries. So he is going to get a real good taste of the Southern accent along with his European, excellence that we're going to share today. And even though we're in the same type of industry, we're going to share some enlightenment of things that we might do a little bit different and what we do probably the same for our clients. So welcome to our podcast today, Mike.
It's so cool to be on the podcast, Carla. It's great to be the first international guest.
Yes, so welcome to our podcast. So I want to talk about what your business does for your clients online. I did a little bit of research on you, and you have some excellent awards listed. You've earned them. You've worked really hard. So talk about us about what your company does for your business. What do you do?
So basically what we do is we help clients who are selling technical products to other businesses market and sell those products more efficiently. So we talk about moving from the awareness stage to the opportunity stage. So very much in that marketing section. And really what we're trying to do, and I think what the goal of most marketing companies should be, is take those prospects that are in that funnel, in that process of going through the marketing, and move them through more quickly. So it's all about velocity through the funnel is what we talk about.
I think in some ways or another, we take small businesses and grow with them and things like that. And I want to talk about some of these awards that you've actually done. But I also want to mention that you guys are in the UK, Europe, and now in North America. So you guys are definitely got offices spread out. And it does show that you guys are in San Francisco, California now. So you guys are just in the big playing field of being everywhere. So I think that's a great piece that you've taken something and started growing with it. Did it start as a small idea?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, the business has been going over 40 years, but I bought the business in 2001. So I was in the situation where I was a client of the business. And I actually liked the agency so much, I ended up buying it. The two founders were looking to retire. They approached me, and it was an offer I couldn't turn down. Having said that, I had no experience of working in a marketing agency before I took it over. I'd used them, but I'd not worked in it. So there was certainly some speed bumps as well.
So you've had definitely some learning curves in getting in this market. How was that for you? So when you say bumps in the road, what part of the industry did it take? What was the hardest part to learn in this industry?
That's a great question. And I think really the biggest challenge, it sounds fairly trivial, but it really matters, is when I worked in the client side in marketing, people were really concerned about winning the big sales, winning the big deals. And this was with a pretty big, semiconductor company. So it was all about the biggest customers, the biggest deals. When you move into marketing as an agency, you're fundamentally selling time. And even if you're selling on fixed price, basically, typically agencies work internally by working out the cost in terms of how much time they spend. That's a completely different way of looking at things because, if you think about a big semiconductor deal, throwing, one person working it solidly for 2 months is insignificant in terms of the total potential value. But for an agency, it's very different. And that culture was a real challenge for me to understand.
I think we look at the value of time, and sometimes clients, come to us with the idea, but I think they don't understand the time that it takes. Especially if you're in a new market or you're expanding your businesses in an area that you're thinking that you might have some opportunity at. Sometimes we don't really understand. They don't understand that time that it takes. And so it is us up to marketing people to help hold their hand a little bit, but also understand their frustration because their expectations might be different than your expectations. And so that's a big thing when it comes to certain clients, is getting them to understand time. And I think that that's important. And so I want to talk about some of these. You guys have won some major awards over the time. Did you feel like that, being that you've taken over the company, did you feel like that was something important to make the company, go after? What was the significance of these awards, and how did that make you feel once you achieve these achievements that you've done now?
That's interesting because I probably have to be honest about this because people from Napier might listen. Um, I really care about the awards. They matter a lot to me, but I'm not very good at celebrating the winning. And people will tell you this, that actually I'm not great at celebrating when we win things. And I'm immensely proud of what's been done to win those awards and the campaigns we've run and the clients we've worked with. Um, but it's not really a big party when we win when I'm around. So actually, one of the things we've got now is more people going, no, Mike, we're actually going to organize this. We're going to have a party. We're going to celebrate winning this. This is actually a big deal. And
Yeah.
I think, whereas almost when you're running the business, you sometimes feel like you don't want to take your foot off the accelerator. You don't want to stop and celebrate because that might be it. You want to keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. And actually what's been really good about the awards now is that I think we've really celebrated a couple of the awards recently. And it's been a great thing for the team. But, the team needs to recognize that they've achieved something really important.
I think that is so important to understand that it's okay to have the cake and the ice cream here. You know what I mean? And when you work in an achievement, what's important to you as a company, taking a time out to understand and relate to all the hard work that you put in it. It's okay, Mike, you can celebrate. You can, it's time, it's time to do that. And I think it's more important now than ever before because this industry that we're in now, it's like there's so many people like us, and it's hard to distinguish who's good and who's the best. And so taking a moment to appraise those people, I think, is so important now than ever before. So I do want to talk about something I thought that was really interesting, because I do believe in steps and processes. And one of the things that you have on your website is that you talk about the 4-step process on your website. And can you explain to me what that means to you? Like, what does that, how, not that you have it on your website, but do you take that and apply that to your clients?
That's a question I love because I used to be an engineer, as you mentioned, and I love process. I love making sure that things are going to work. And I think, sometimes in marketing, because creativity is so important,
Mm-hmm.
people are reluctant to take process. They're reluctant to put structure into what they do. And I think that's a terrible mistake because actually the structure means that you get those basics done and allows you to be more creative. So our process is really all about thinking clearly about what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do it before we actually execute. And then it also includes this really critical stage of evaluation where we're trying to avoid, you run a project, you spend the client's money, and then you look at the end and go, well, did it work? Did it not? But we're trying to get this fourth phase, we call enhance, which means we're continually looking at results and continually trying to tweak things if they're not working. And in fact, in marketing, sometimes things don't work. And it can be crazy things. You can have, in our business, content is really important. Ebooks and white papers really matter. And you can have very slight differences in the title, and one will resonate with the audience and one won't. It's really hard to know why one works and one doesn't. So you've got to be really open to saying, actually, this isn't working. We need to change it. And so that's why it's important, because we've got that structure about what we're trying to achieve and how we're doing it. We're really clear about that. And then we're really clear about how we're going to measure whether we actually do what we try and do.
I think the hardest part in marketing is knowing the fact that telling a client that something doesn't work. And, I think that, but also catching it before it gets too far out, you know what I mean? And I think that that's important, because once something starts in the process, there may be those hiccups, but it is a guessing game more now than ever before, even though we have all of this data and all the stuff that comes to us, and we're supposed to analyze it and figure it all out. It's still a mystery puzzle to us too, but we're doing it with the best intentions too at the same time. And so I think that that's so important to understand and relate that back to the client. But I think transparency probably is one of the biggest things that you have to be with a client, and know the fact that maybe a client doesn't work for you, right? Because you've worked so hard and maybe it just doesn't pan out. And so I think that's where honesty comes into that factor. Sometimes it's just good to say, okay, well, this is not working. Um, because I think you misled the client when you're not, you know what I mean? And I think that that's important. I like the fact that you have the words determine, focus, deliver, and enhance. Because I think that that's a really good way to look at businesses, is those phases that you've got on your website. I think that's really important to do that. So today I want to talk about, and I think this is a real passion for me too. I'm a big supporter of small businesses. I love it because I think they're just the backbone of our economy. So let's talk about that. Why is it so important to you to build those businesses with small businesses? Why is that important to you?
Well, for a start, we're a small business. So, I think that's important to recognize. We work with clients across the spectrum in terms of size. We work with, giant global companies who are tens of billions of dollars a year turnover, hundreds of billions of dollars a year turnover, actually, all the way down to very small startup clients. And I think it's really interesting in some ways, the small companies, they actually can be more fun. I mean, particularly for an agency. And the reason is big companies have a lot of structure, a lot of process, and in particular, a lot of rules and regulations. And that makes sense. If you've got 1,000 marketers, and we've got clients with more than 1,000 marketers working for them, they've got to have rules about what you can and can't do. But those rules can end up being overly restrictive. And so you're trying to be creative within, really quite confined limits. Whereas with small companies, you can actually often go and try stuff that's crazy. And sometimes it doesn't work. And if you get the right client, they're like, we've learned something, that's just fantastic. So you have to pick the right thing. But these small clients, they can try different things. And even more interestingly, they have access to a lot of the tools that big companies have. So, if you look back, back to when I started in marketing last century, sounds so long ago, big companies had huge advantages. One of the ways you had to reach people was through print publications. Advertising was incredibly expensive. There was this massive barrier of entry to small companies. Now, if you look at it, and in our sector, because we're business to business, LinkedIn is really important. Any company can get on LinkedIn. Any company can target Google on Google searches and run Google ads. And so now you've got this incredible, almost imbalance where small companies have the ability to be more creative, more free, less restricted. And they have access to pretty much all the same tools and capabilities as large companies. So I think that's really exciting. And I really, feel optimistic about the future for small companies.
If you think about it, I actually ran a statistic that said, this is just the economy in the America. I'm not sure how this relates to you, but I think in our sense that 50% of the employed in population is working for small businesses. And so it's no surprise that when we think about the mom and pop businesses, how much it's important to support them in our economy, right? Because when we think about who's employed with that, because there's a lot of people who make that choice to go work for small businesses instead of big corporations. And like you said earlier, when you get into these bigger companies or bigger companies, there's a lot of rules. And then not on top of that, what you may provide, there's always someone that's always got something else that wants to intertwine into that too. So it's harder sometimes to work for some of the bigger corporations, because then you've got all these different people that you've got to not deal with, but there's like a list of people that you always got to go through to go, okay, is this approved? Is this approved? Is this approved? Are you okay with that? Are you okay? You know what I mean? Whereas in a small business, it's just a really direct line of communication. And I think that that's important. So I think when we talk about small businesses, we have to look at those percentages. Is that true for your end? Is those small businesses in the UK also in that high percentage as well?
Yeah, I think it's a very similar percentage over here. And I think it's interesting. If you look at big companies, they often have specialists that have incredible depth of knowledge, because they can afford to employ these specialists, and they can have a large number of people covering different things. But the downside is people can get forced into silos, and particularly even in marketing, in large companies. You are the email marketer for customer retention, and that's all you do, and it's just customer retention. And I mean, just this morning I was talking to a marketing manager in a small to medium sized business in the UK, and she was amazing. She knew everything, and she understood her business. She knew everything they were doing. She had this overall view, and I think in small businesses you can do that. It's very hard to do that in a large business, and so it becomes very difficult to create these sort of holistic campaigns. And so you have lots of little campaigns going off, and you might have a huge number in a large business, but it's not quite the same. So I think it's fun. If you want that depth of knowledge, you're probably going to go to a large organization, and you're probably going to be incredibly focused and unbelievably expert in your field. But if you like breadth, and I personally like this breadth and integrating different things together, then I think small businesses actually have a bit of advantage over large businesses. And that's really exciting when we work with them.
I mean, I think that the word that you just said was holistic, and a lot of people don't use that terminology in today's market. And I think that we tend to see more people forced to spend money in areas that I don't think that they should be at. You know what I mean? Or they don't need to be in every one of these platforms that we're trying to push out. And like you said, LinkedIn is probably one of the best platforms out there right now, as far as return in value, because we all know that Facebook has not given that return in value like it has in the last several years. Not everybody belongs on Instagram. Not everybody belongs on, I don't actually do business on TikTok. And I know that some people might not like that, but I do not the kind of clients that I have need those types of platforms. But I think that you have to be smart and you have to be honest with the clients and say, this is where you need to be at. And we can do it holistically, organically, and without having to spend the bank, but it takes time to do that. So how do you tell a business, how do you get them to think big? So how do you get that small business that doesn't have the marketing knowledge that you have, right? Because you have to forecast it. How do you get them to think big? How do you get them to move forward? How do you do that?
So actually, I think in many ways, a lot of things we do to get small businesses to think big are not actually that different from talking to large businesses. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to be really clear about what's going to move the needle for that business. So you'll talk to a business and you're trying to understand what really matters. And for a small business, that might be really, really specific. It might be like, there's this one company, we want to sell to them. They would absolutely transform our business. And small businesses can have incredible laser-like focus on trying to achieve these objectives. And that's fantastic. And I think it's about really being ruthless about what you want and being prepared to let go of all the stuff you feel you should be doing and it feels comfortable and it's got lots of clicks or all these kind of vanity metrics, and go down to, well, what do you really care about? To be fair, we see that in some large businesses as well. One of our best campaigns in LinkedIn that we ran, in terms of results and certainly in terms of return on investment, we were targeting one company for this, again, very large, hundreds of millions of dollars client, so a big company, and they just wanted to get a meeting with this one company, and we had to do all sorts of things to get to this LinkedIn minimum number before the campaign would run. We ran the campaign and we got exactly what we wanted out of it. It was fantastic. We got a meeting with actually our client's CEO with the company. That's brilliant, but actually small businesses can do that, and the impact on a small business of a win like that is even greater than the impact on a large business. So I think it's about focus and really being clear about what you want and really committing to it. And sometimes it doesn't work. And I think that's one of the secrets that marketers should be more honest about, particularly if you're being focused. Sometimes it doesn't work, but if you're being focused, there's a much better chance of it working than if you're just spreading, all your activities around different channels, different content, different messages. Focus definitely works, and small businesses can do that really well.
I mean, when we starting a business, a lot of times we don't really account for all the things that we do and all the things that add up. And sometimes, when we're talking to a small business, someone will call them and say, "Hey, I've got this great deal for you," or "I've got this great package." And then they'll go sign that check and say, "Okay, you promised that you would give me so many impressions, not necessarily leads, but I'm going to get visually seen." And they'll go out and spend this money. And a lot of times, like, the client will come back and say, "Hey, Carla, I wrote this check for X amount of dollars over here, and I'm going to be running it for 6 months at this amount." And I'm over here going, you could have taken that money and, put it in these other areas that would have been more beneficial. And sometimes you have to kind of let them fail a little bit in their marketing, not not with the decisions, but maybe just to prove to them, saying, and they'll come back and they'll go, well, maybe I screwed up, and what can I do with this money now? And then you can prove it to them. And I think that that's very important. But what I was getting to was, when you're a small business and you're starting out, if you don't really understand the struggles, and we think of, like, check, website's done, check, Facebook is up, but I think sometimes they get stuck, and they're stuck in the area of, like, what's next for us, what's next. And so I think it's up to us to nurture that and help them and guide them, but also be realistic to that as well. So I want to talk about, as a small business, what do you give them, or how do you recommend them? Do you sit down with them every 6 months? Do you sit down with them once a year? How often are you doing that client relationship with them?
So we do it much more often than that. So what we're trying to do is always trying to understand what we're trying to achieve and whether we're doing it. It's really that simple. So quite often with our clients, a lot of them will be on a monthly review. And that kind of doesn't matter in a way as to how much they're spending. Because, a large budget to a multi-billion-dollar company might actually not be very significant. And what might be a fraction of that money for a small company might really matter to them. So I think it's about really being able to set that cadence of when you review your achievements or when you review your progress based upon when you can get good data. And that to me is super important. I mean, I'm an engineer. I could talk forever about the way marketers use data and misuse data. But if you're looking at a campaign, looking at LinkedIn, you're doing lead generation campaign, and you've generated 2 leads, you really don't have data you can process. There's so much randomness going on that you just don't know really, how well that campaign's working. And with some of our small campaigns, it might take quite a long time to gather that data because we're just not generating huge volumes. And it could be they only care about a relatively small number of people who really are going to move the needle for that business. So they'd rather spend 3 to 6 months trying to get leads from the 20 people who are going to transform their business than, spend all that money in a week and get 100 leads from people who really are going to make no difference and probably just going to waste their sales team's time. So I think it's about understanding, what matters to the client, what makes them feel good.
Yeah.
And also being clear about when we get data we can act on because we know it's reliable.
And I think that's so important. And I think it all depends on the client and how we're relating to them and how we are transforming their business from where it was, where it started, and where it's, in that measurement. I do agree with you. I think we're so inundated with so much data now, we can manipulate it to make it look good. And you have to know that sometimes, like, high impression numbers may not mean a whole lot to marketing people. We know that, we should be honest to say, did it convert? Did it convert into, the click-through rates? Were they high enough based on those impressions? Not just throwing big numbers at clients to make them look like they're doing something. So I agree with you. I think that we have to be honest with the data, simplify it so that they do understand it, because they can be overwhelmed by it. A lot of clients don't understand all of those numbers. It's really up to us to interpret that to them in the terms that they can understand that. And I think that's important. And it sounds like to me that you guys do a lot of lead generation in LinkedIn. I think that with LinkedIn, and we'll talk about that for a second, there's just so much opportunity with LinkedIn now. Whereas, I've seen the transition since, we started, right? So if we think about how long ago that was, that's been a long ago, right? We think years back. And the transition of that program has really enhanced, they've really taken the model of the business to business connections very seriously versus how we look at Facebook, right? And Facebook is really about branding the business in front of people. We're not going to get the likes and shares like we used to, right? Our percentages are much lower than what they were. But I think LinkedIn has really become this product. And I think that we're starting to see this transition where businesses are now actively on it more and more now than ever before. Are you doing that same? Are you seeing that same transition over in the UK for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think LinkedIn is totally dominating in terms of being the business social network, and it's becoming very important. It's really interesting, though, because it's also quite clear that there's a group of people in business who are not active on LinkedIn. And so, this is fascinating. I mean, in the real heyday of Facebook pretty much reached the whole of America or the whole of the UK. Crudely speaking, the adult population, everybody was interacting with it at some point. That's not quite the case with LinkedIn. There are a lot of people on LinkedIn who see it as just an online CV repository. They don't really interact. But equally, there's a huge number that do. So for us, it's by far the best social platform in terms of engagement, in terms of our ability to target, all of those metrics, and also in terms of actually volume of quality activity. So we're definitely seeing that. I mean, the other social networks, they can be kind of different. So, if you look at Facebook, I mean, one of our clients had this great phrase. And he said, you've got to understand that people go on to Facebook to waste time. So if you're a business advertising on Facebook, your goal is to help them waste time, because that's what they want to do. And you should enable what they want to do. And he ran some great campaigns around some really crazy promotions. So I still don't know if it's true, but they were a PC retailer. So they sold PC systems. And there was a story they accidentally over-ordered these SpongeBob clocks. And so they ran all sorts of promotions with SpongeBob SquarePants clocks. And the excuse was, it was an accident. We ordered 10 times too many, extra zero or something. I think actually they just really liked them and ordered a lot. But it worked really well for them because it was silly. It was, kind of a bit irreverent. It would certainly let people waste time. And it actually helped build their brand because people knew them as this SpongeBob clock company, and they bought their PCs because they got the clock. So I think the other platforms work, but you've really got to tailor those campaigns. And some brands, have got to be a little bit careful about going crazy in business to business. So we have some brands we work with there. They're selling products that are super high reliability. I mean, we've worked with companies that literally attach wings to aircraft. You don't want to be too crazy and too relaxed and too funky when that's what you're doing, because actually, if something's attaching a wing to an aircraft that I'm on, I want that to be really, really boring, because I just don't want anything to go wrong.
I mean, if you think about it, I mean, just going back to that, I think you said Facebook's like wasting time. And I think that Instagram is more of the storytelling aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And so I agree with the fact that we're kind of playing this game with these platforms now. Before we, because I can remember when we first started, social media was like one of those things. Like, how do you even get people to convince to even be on them? I think I remember having to convince businesses going, "Hey, you need to be on social media," because they really didn't understand the tangibility. And plus, two, the return investment was not really like, how do you get that return investment without having to spend ads and things like that. I call it Facebook's kind of like the marinating aspect, right? You're kind of marinating it, putting it out there, hoping to attach it to an audience or your targeted people. And sometimes it sticks. Some clients, they stick. And some clients, it's like, well, maybe it's just really more the branding aspect, to keep it in front of people. So I agree with the platform aspect. And when businesses, small businesses come to you, it's our job to really kind of hold their hand and go, okay, you really need to be in these three sectors, not all over the game. And so that's how I tell clients is like, a lot of times it's like, just know the fact that where you need to be at right now. And then maybe as you grow, you add these other pieces in, these other platforms into that. That way it doesn't seem overwhelming. But I think LinkedIn is probably right now one of the biggest markets that you should be in, right? Hands down. And there is a lot of businesses, a lot of companies that are still not even on LinkedIn. So the power of LinkedIn is going to continue to grow. And I do think the platform is becoming more and more sophisticated so that we're filtering out and finding things that really connect with us differently, in our businesses. I do want to talk about a few businesses, and I wanted to mention it, those small businesses that grew into billions, right? And so I think we're going to talk about the first one I would have on my list is Facebook. We all know Facebook started out with Mark Zuckerberg's, in his Harvard bedroom, dorm room, and I don't remember if you knew it, but back in the day, the only way that we connected with our friends from high school was through a program called classmates.com. And then Facebook came out. Of course, we had some other things, but Facebook came out and changed instantly for us. So, you can, grow a business from just nothing. You know what I mean? If you take an idea like that and nurture it, you never know where you're going to take it. So, do you convince your clients to think like those big companies like that? Do you forecast them and make them think of bigger ideas for their business? Do you see their idea and have them expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of our clients are tech startups, Silicon Valley based tech startups. We're working with a client that's doing some really super cool stuff in artificial intelligence, relatively small company, startup funded, super exciting. I mean, and the interesting thing about a lot of these companies actually is not whether they can stay and be successful as a small company, because the reality is either these guys are going to be super successful or they're probably not going to make it. And I think, the AI market is interesting, that there's a million, people, it feels, starting up companies in AI. And I don't think anyone would say there's not going to be some huge companies generated from all this startup activity. So all these startups should be thinking, yeah, there's massive potential. Having said that, we have worked with some companies who haven't wanted to grow very fast. They've actually wanted to, maintain things. And interestingly, particularly in the area of software development, there's actually a lot of feeling about, we want to do something specialist. We want to be the best in the world, but we don't want to do everything. We just want to do this little bit and be the best. And if we are the best, we've got this future mapped out for us. That means we're going to make great money. Everyone's going to be happy, employed. That, people are going to feel like they've got expertise to deliver fantastic work. And they build these companies that actually turn out to be incredibly successful, happy, retain employees for a long time. And I think, you don't have to grow to be giant. It's not important. I mean, in reality, if you're not going to be giant, you need to have something else special. But I think there is a second way for small businesses. Small businesses certainly shouldn't feel that they're not important because they're small. And I think that's one of the risks of talking about the potential to grow to, become unicorn-sized companies. Is it
Yeah.
makes those companies that haven't done it perhaps feel less important. And I disagree with that. I think there are small companies that are massively, massively important, that probably are best staying small than trying to grow big.
I agree with you. I think that, and I do have some, people that I know over the years that they're okay being in this design of their company. I think it all depends on how a company looks at their success, and I think it's okay to think about what's important to your business. You don't always have to be massive to be important. And I think that that's important. But I think it's also one of the things you mentioned was companies now are longevity for employees is important now more than ever because I don't know about you, but I see it on LinkedIn a lot where there's a lot of people dropping, hey, I've got a new job, or I'm dropping, here's a new advance, announcement, I'm going over here. So the job hopping is starting more and more now. So I think it's much more important now that we are nurturing the people that are part of the company as we continue to grow, because not every company starts out with employees that are willing to grow with them, right? There's a difference. You may have warm bodies in your seats, but necessarily not the supporting aspect of like, I'm comfortable with where we're at, but the company wants to grow. But then, so I guess it all depends on the people that's in it. But I do agree with you. You don't have to be massive to be important in this industry. Something that I watched the other day, and I saw it was Kevin O'Leary. He's the guy that's on Shark Tank, and he said something that I thought resonated with me about through the years, like how did he start his business? And he just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And he talked about how he came across a software program, and he was just like, he saw the potential of it, and now it's like worth what, billions of dollars. And so being in the right place at the right time, sometimes companies can be in the right place at the right time, you know? And so I think that that's important to really establish with our clients. So I'm going to end it with, let's talk about how do you get a business to grow in marketing? And I wrote down a few things that's important on my side. So one of the things that I mentioned was turn your employees into your own brand, ambassadors. We're not looking, now we're like wanting organic results more and more. How do you get your employees to be on part of your company? Do you work with your employees on getting them as part of your brand ambassadors for your company?
Um, well, I certainly hope so, because our employees actually own the company. Um,
Oh,
so,
that's,
so,
yeah.
so we're in a situation where almost exactly a year ago, as we were recording this, we became an employee-owned company. So 70% of the stock is actually owned by the employees. So effectively, they're my boss, and hopefully, they see a lot of value in that, and they have ability to input into the company. So they can actually drive a lot of the company strategy. They can come up with ideas, and there's a much more formal mechanism for that once they're owners. Not least because literally they can fire me. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
So if it
Uh,
comes down to this
yeah,
podcast and they don't like it,
yeah.
I'm just kidding, Mike.
I've got to perform well every day. There's a bit of pressure, but hopefully that also helps them be proud of the company, and it's great. And one of the things I love is you post something on LinkedIn, and like almost immediately I see people liking it from the company. It's like that's fantastic. People are there, they're engaging, they're showing support. So I think that's important, and I think small businesses can do it. I think small businesses in general, and this is not universally true, but in general, have employees that are much more committed to the business, and much better at brand ambassadors, because they know they see a bigger section of the business. Again, it comes back to, in a small business, every one person sees a much bigger chunk of that business and is involved with it. And I think that makes them great brand ambassadors. I think, at the other end of the spectrum, you see these giant companies, and they go, "Oh, we've got 1,000 salespeople around the world. What we're going to do is we're going to implement this tool that helps them post these updates on LinkedIn." And of course, the salespeople all post exactly the same update. It's all auto-generated from this system, and then you get a customer get 20 copies of the same post, all from different people, and it feels so unauthentic.
Yeah.
And a lot of those big companies, they are desperate for the authenticity you get from an employee in a small company advocating for that company. So it's one of those small company superpowers.
You made that comment about, I think the next one I wrote down was using social media to grow your online footprint. And so that was actually my number two, along with your brand ambassadors, that being that you're a small company, having that online footprint, I think is important too, right?
I totally agree. And I love your point about using social media. I think, we're seeing search going towards, generative AI and actually producing an answer rather than producing a list of links. it's going to get harder for smaller businesses to actually get into that answer. So rather than having to be in the top 10, you've now got to be in the top 1 or 2. Social media is going to be something where small businesses can be really, really successful in their niche. So I totally agree with that.
I'm going to mention this. I know that AI is like the hottest topic right now, and we talk about all these different tools, and now everybody's on board, and now now everybody's like giving their suggestion on these AI tools. Perfectly fine, right? You do whatever you want to do, but I do think that when we talk about transparency, authenticity, and really showing your power, small businesses really can stand out by doing that. And I think that that's going to really change the game here. And I wrote down number 3: measure what works and redefine as you grow your business. I think that's really important, is like understanding where you're at. Like you just said earlier in your podcast, that you meet with your clients, you go over the information, even if it's small changes. You're telling them and reassuring them that there's areas that they can grow. And I think that's important. It's really initiating those conversations, because conversations, communications, continues you to grow. And so redefining that and growing that business with them, I think, is really important. And you do that with your customers. Now, one of the things you did mention earlier before we got on our podcast, you said that you had a story on why you named your company what you named it. Can you share
And,
that real quick in the
and
podcast?
we can definitely do this. It wasn't me. So as I said, I bought the company about 20 years after it was started. And being a small company, I can say this because I don't have to worry about whether or not it's on brand or anything like that, which is, again, the love of the small company. So our business was started by 2 people, and those 2 people were having an affair at the time. And so they wanted to spend more time together. They both worked in marketing and technology, and this was back in 1980. They thought, what we'll do is we'll start an agency together, and because that's the way we can spend time together and no one's going to question it. So one of them lived in a road called Napier Mews in London. And so they decided that just the postal address of Napier Mews, London, sounded really cool. So that's why it's called Napier, which I think is a great story. The 2 of them eventually married. It was, it all worked out really beautifully in the end. But yeah, it was basically a reason for 2 people to be able to meet.
Well, I think it's a great story because, we all wonder how certain companies become who they are. And so you've taken something, a passion of yours, because you were an engineer previously, right? And you went from there to a whole different type of industry, and you have just successfully moved it, and you've expanded. You've got an employee investment company. You have done some things that other people would be envy of. I mean, I'm actually pretty jealous right now. So, your awards, you definitely speak volumes in the kind of commitment you do for your clients. And I don't think it matters where we're from, right? It matters what we are providing. And I think 100% of that is really transparency, communication, and you do all of those factors along with that. So your passion for love for what you do you continue just like sit in awe and go, wow, I'm still doing this in this marketing crazy world that we're in now?
I'm really pleased to be able to do it. I think it's great. I mean, I think the difference we have now, and we're still small, but we're bigger than we were. I get to work with more great people, and I think one of the ways small businesses succeed is by being prepared to hire people that are a little bit scary because maybe they're a little bit good and they might show up where we have weaknesses.
Yeah.
And so I think that's always a good thing. And that's not necessarily bringing in people with loads and loads of experience. I mean, bringing in really talented young people. And this is a whole nother podcast, but we have a whole program around bringing young people in and developing them. And we get the best hires by hiring young people. So typically college grads, sometimes, straight out of high school. And we get amazing people, and we keep investing more. And every time we invest more in these people, we get better results. So, it's just great. I mean, I just love working with the people at Napier. It's a really great team, and to be able to work with all of those, given everything that's going on It's just amazing.
I had to say that's such a great idea of knowing the fact that you're investing, years of your knowledge back into those people that are coming out of college, getting out of high school. And I hate to say this, but you don't even really have to have such a marketing degree to go in it, because once you get in to this department, into this industry, there's so many different pieces of it that you may have missed out on, knowing the fact that you might have a passion for. And that's where it's as leaders, as like we are, it's really to push people in that direction. And I think you're doing a great job doing that. So I want to say thank you for sharing your knowledge today, being a part of this podcast today. And I want to just thank you for coming on board. And is there anything else that you would like to share with us in our audience?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing is, if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. They can probably work out that, if our website is napierb2b.com, my email address is mike@napierb2b.com. Feel free to do that, or hit me up on LinkedIn. I love to hear from other people who are interested in marketing and hear other views.
Well, I wanted to appreciate you coming on to our Coffee and Hustle podcast. And I really hope that we can do this again and talk about other things, especially AI and all the changes that are happening in our industry. So thank you so much for Mike coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me on the podcast, Cara. It's a real privilege.
Thank you so much. We'll see you again soon. Okay.